Jack vs. the Space Empire of Continuum by Scott Rice. Read for you by Hellfreezer. Part 4. Can you get into the library? I asked. To a certain extent, anti-human. I do not have full access to all of it. No one does except for the Guardians who control the information within the library. But I can get into small sections of it which is considered public access to all. The data within these sections may be microscopic when compared with the full library, but it can still take many, many lifetimes to search even this amount of information. I'd like to do that sometime if I can, Isaac. Of course, anti-human. I would be happy to assist you in this endeavor, replied Isaac.
Jeebus! Get a room, you two,
piped in Jack. I watched in silence as we passed over the edge of the Atlantic Ocean and moved over southern Europe. I could easily spot Italy, France, and Spain as we began to pass over them. The horizon line moved upward quickly, and the large land masses began to flatten out. Mountains grew fast, and we soon leveled out over northern France and headed out over the English Channel. Within a minute we passed the Channel and crossed into South England. The lower we flew, the faster the landscape passed by us, until most of what I could see was a blur. Isaac turned and banked the Puffin this way and that, and approached the outskirts of London. We were thrown hard against our seat restraints as Isaac decelerated our speed to something more manageable, especially over a well-populated city. While we remained invisible, the air we displaced was not, and we could have caused terrible damage to everything around us.
Look, there's the Gherkin, and there's Big Ben and London Bridge. And over there is the House of Commons, said Harry excitedly. The Millennium Wheel is right there. We're finally home, Richard.
Right. First thing that's gone right this trip, replied Richard while eyeing Jack warily. We've got to let Mum know what's happened. And about these two blokes. Mum's not going to be happy about that.
I just hope she doesn't shave me this time, Richard. I hate it when she does that.
Just let me do all the talking, Harry. You'll be fine, right?
I hope so, Richard,
Harry said in a whisper. He was visibly shaken and obviously afraid. Isaac flew over London at a stately pace. I didn't recognize any of what I saw. Just street upon street of older homes built up against each other. Everything was so tightly packed together. How do people live, I thought to myself. I prefer some land between my neighbours. The Puffin flew into what I assume was the industrial part of town. Much seemed to be abandoned, judging from the dismal state of the factories and buildings spread around. Some were evidently still in operation, while other parts were rotten and collapsing under decades of neglect, dirt and graffiti. I could easily see London's industrial base had suffered in recent years, much in the same way as Detroit has suffered. There was no hiding the destruction. Social rot was everywhere. The Puffin slowed over a section of heavily collapsed factory. The compound was mostly rubble except for the main factory building. It was made from stained black brick and stone with large round pillars that supported the structure. While it was damaged beyond repair, it still resolutely stood tall. The Puffin slowed, then hovered over the intact structure for a moment. It then began to descend toward the dilapidated roof. I thought we were about to crash into the roof, but the ship seamlessly passed through and continued inside the building. It was as if the entire building wasn't there, or as if it was merely a ghost building. The Puffin was quite a large ship, and it filled up the interior of the factory building. We passed through each rotting floor just as easily as the roof. Everything inside was rusted, cracked, and filled with dripping water pools or bent and cracked wooden floors. Ferns and lichen grew in the sad lighting, which passed through dirty and cracked windows. As we passed through the main factory floor and dropped down into lower sections of the factory, it was pitch black here. Isaac toggled the puffin's exterior lighting, and white beams sprang to life. The outside light seemed powerful. The oily blackness absorbed the light as if it were food. It looked like the factory's old boilers were here and had been here for lifetimes. They were rusted and pitted with eons of dank water from above dripping all around them. The boilers were surrounded by a sea of rusted and bent pipes that once took fluids to and from the factory. Now they were a forest of dusty cobwebs and long-forgotten equipment. Everything in this place was death. Buildings die as much as we do, and they suffer putrefaction as well. This was once a strong, proud industrial complex, which must have employed thousands of people. Now it was just a rotting skeleton of years past. We passed through the lowest level of the factory and entered a huge underground cavern. Jet airliners could easily fly in this enormous space, without fear of hitting anything. While it was rather dark here, it was much brighter than what we had just come through. The puffin turned and flew off towards a large superstructure in the distance. Around were all manner of ships sitting in dock. Some were as large as the puffin, while many were considerably smaller. There were a few that were truly titanic in size. They could have been over a mile in length. But it was difficult to judge the scale of a ship at these distances. Regardless, there seemed to be an entire flotilla down here. It was breathtaking. "Exactly how many Kensians live here?" I asked. "This place is huge." "The highest number of inhabitants hit 487,685 souls. Base capacity can safely house 1 million Kensians, if the need arises," said Isaac. "That number has drastically dropped in recent months because of the exodus, however." "Exodus?" I asked. Aurelia will have to explain that to you, Anti-Human." "Who is Aurelia?" "She is our rightful queen, Anti-Human. She is the leader of our people on this world, and others. She is the last of the great leaders, and her word is law." "Why is all this here? I mean, why go through all the effort of building this, when there are probably thousands of similar worlds in space?" "Again, Aurelia will have to explain this to you," said Isaac. "It would be presumptuous of me to inform you on the current state of affairs." I felt a bump as Isaac sat the puffin down on a circular landing pad. The engine spun down and the ship began to quiet. The landing pad suddenly spun the entire ship around and moved forward on an unseen track. It eventually dropped into the gigantic superstructure and moved the puffin to a sort of grappling device. The grappling took hold of the puffin and lifted it up off the landing pad, which moved back the way it had come. The puffin rose up and was locked into place within the superstructure. A thin walkway moved to the front of the ship and stopped. "We are fully docked, and it is safe to exit the vehicle," announced Isaac in a dry tone. Richard and Harry disconnected their safety harnesses and stood up out of their chairs. The holographic cockpit shut down, and we were back to seeing the bridge compartment. It was as if I was suddenly blinded. The only access to the outside of the ship was looking through the cockpit windows. It was rather unnerving to be cut off like that. Everything seemed as if it were closed off. I could see why the Kensians used this technology. "Aurelia has been notified of your return, gentlemen, and she is awaiting you on the hill. Please don't be late." "Again?" said Isaac.
"Bugger it!"
exclaimed Harry.
"We're in for it now, Richard. I'm not looking forward to this."
"Oh, shut your snout and just nod at whatever I say, Harry. None of this was our fault."
Richard looked at Jack and growled. Jack just smiled in return and waved his hand.
"Nothing we could have done about any of it."
We all left the command deck and filed into the hangar deck below, Richard fiddled with a control panel, and once again, the ramp began to melt and solidified into a ramp. Jack's truck was still tethered down with all of our camping gear stored in the bed. I felt a pang of depression as I passed it. All of that delicious boredom lost. But no, I had to be here with Jack on an alien spaceship deep under London. This was decidedly unboring. Damn it. The first thing I noticed as I walked down the Puffin's ramp was the smell. It wasn't bad, just wholly different. There were the familiar scents of oil, grease, burning electronics and metal, but there was more to it. There was a musky overtone filled with unfamiliar smells I couldn't begin to identify. There was a sweet flowery scent alongside a hot metallic smell. It was all very strange and only reinforced the notion that I was among true aliens here. The meager lighting was tinged green, which seemed to be prevalent throughout this vast hangar. As we reached the bottom of the ramp, a small golf cart-sized vehicle moved to us and stopped. It had no wheels. It simply hovered a few inches above the floor. I couldn't help but think this was some serious Star Wars shit right here. Oh man, I hope they have lightsabers. I've always wanted one of those. Its doors opened up from the roof, and a chime beckoned us to enter. Richard and Harry entered the vehicle's front seats and connected their seatbelts. Jack and I were simply in awe of this whole place. We couldn't stop from staring at everything around us. We were surrounded by amazing technology, which was old, rusty, and stained. The irony was not lost on me.
"Well," asked Richard from the front seat, "are you two apes just going to stand there looking dumb? Or are you going to get in so we can shove off?"
"Rude," shouted Harry. "They're not apes, Richard. They're humans."
"What's the difference? Both are amazingly stupid and smell similar."
Richard was looking directly at Jack.
"The only real difference between the two is one can wipe its arse while the other one doesn't. And I'll be buggered if I can tell which one is which."
Jack, still smiling, leaned in toward Richard and spoke softly. "That's two, Chewie. One more and we'll have problems." At this, Jack swung inside the vehicle and closed his door. I sighed and got in on the passenger side. This just kept getting worse and worse. How little did I know how wrong I was. It was about to get a whole lot worse. In fact, it was about to get terrible. "Yo, Chewbacca's, where are you taking us? I'm getting sleepy." Jack was being infuriatingly obnoxious. Why on earth was he being like this? I didn't understand it. Richard and Harry hadn't done anything to us. We were clearly the aggressors here. Acting like an incorrigible child wasn't like him at all. Well, somewhat unlike him anyway. I needed to have a talk with him and see if I could figure out why. The vehicle silently moved forward, and a great door in front of us split into several pieces and moved into the wall. Our little floating golf cart then accelerated at breathtaking speed. I was hammered back into my seat with almost violent force. I've never felt this kind of acceleration before. It was shocking. We ran along a corridor which, while dark, was stained with decades of filth. At least it looked like filth. We were zipping along so fast it was hard to see anything with clarity as it blurred past us. A similar door was at the end of the corridor as we approached. The door split like the first one and moved aside. Bright light shone through the empty doorway as we went through. I had to cover my eyes as the light blinded me. As my eyes adjusted, I looked around us and reeled in shock. We were suddenly on another planet. We were on a kind of highway elevated far above the ground. There was a sky, yes, an actual sky down here. A large red sun blazed far above us. The sky was colored a light pink and white. Fluffy clouds drifted slowly all around us, and what looked to be like 3 moons in the sky as well. Below there were white-capped mountains in the far distance, except their shape wasn't exactly right. They were more alien? I guess that's how I could phrase it. The mountains were more sculpted than what we had on the surface of the earth. Nearly all the mountains had a bent knife edge to them, as if some great flood of the past had rushed by and cut them into this shape. The mountains were shaped more like bowed spires than the mountains I was more familiar with. Before them lay a great plain of dark, reddish grass-like plants. The plains rose and fell for miles in every direction. Past them were tall forests made of thin trees. The trees had leaves, but they were almond in shape, and were quite wide. Their colour was bright red, while the trunks looked to be nearly black. There were obviously different species of trees because the leaves and trunks varied widely. Some were thin coils that stretched high into the air. Other trees looked like fluid-filled flat balloons that nudged their way above the leafy canopy. Flying animals of some kind circled in large flocks high above the forest canopy, looping lazily in the warm air rising upwards. "How is this possible?" I stammered. Jack turned to look at me in shock. He was stunned speechless as well. "What you see before you is a representation of our homeworld, anti-human," replied Isaac. "Isaac? Is that you? How did you get here?" I asked. "Simple, anti-human. While I am still inside the puffin, I can utilize transponders to connect with you no matter where you are. It's quite helpful." "More like a pain in me arse," said Richard, who had been silent up until this point. "Nothing like trying to get some peace and quiet, only to have that damn voice come along and ruin it all." Isaac coughed and continued. "Be that as it may, you still have a duty to your mum and your species regardless of your standing, Richard. Aurelia would stand for nothing less." "Wait," spoke Jack. "You mean to tell me the Queen is these guys' mother? Seriously?" "Well, of course, Jack Human. Aurelia is the leader of the High Order, our government. Think of her as a royal queen. Aurelia's family lineage goes back thousands of years. The T'Arish family have ruled the Kensians for many, many generations, and continues on to this day. Richard and Harry are her sons. Technically, they are what you would call princes. They also have a sister named Sally T'Arish. She is the leader of the China contingent, a bunker similar to the one you are currently in. Our belief system is much like the Japanese Bushido Code. We are a species of warriors, and our entire history has surrounded warfare both politically and religiously. Honor, duty, sacrifice are the pillars of our society, and are taken very seriously, deadly seriously. There are many laws that govern impinged honor. Kensians hold honor in the very highest regard, and will go to open war to satisfy it. It would be wise to remember this when conversing with them, Jack Human."
"Princes!"
laughed Jack.
"That explains a lot." "What's wrong with being a prince, eh?"
shot back Richard, clearly annoyed.
"Oh, nothing. If you're a giant poofter."
Jack then raised the tone of his voice, trying to sound feminine, while waving his arms in the air.
"Oh, dearie me, I seem to have pissed myself. Whatever shall I do? I know, I'll have a spot of tea. I'll don my raspberry beret while dancing in purple rain." "Oh, shut up, you furless ape."
"Hey, Andy, that's what Chewie sounds like when doves cry." Richard growled in response. I tried my best to ignore Jack. "Isaac, how did you guys fit all this down here? Exactly how big is this world? As I said, anti-human, what you see is a holographic representation of our homeworld before it was destroyed. The open space is actually much, much smaller than the optical effect you see before you." "So all of this is holograms," I said. Much of it is. The sky and sun, for example, are simplistic holograms emitting light in the correct wavelengths, to simulate what one would observe standing on the southern continent of Kensia. The mountains and plains were actually not as you see them now. The correct geology was further spread out, but it works for what we need here.
So Kensia was destroyed? Asked Jack.
Indeed so, Jack Human. Which is why we are living here on Earth and other worlds. Isaac seemed almost morose. I could detect a great sadness in his words. Richard and Harry were very quiet and seemed to be depressed, if I was any judge of their body language. Isaac, I asked, what happened to you guys? Why was Kensia destroyed? It is not my place to explain this to you, Andy Human. Aurelia will explain all of this to you when you meet her. We should arrive at the hill momentarily. What is the hill? The hill is a geographical site located on Her Majesty's palace grounds. It is the traditional spot for delegates to converse with the Queen. The tradition has the delegates, Queen and her court, sit down in a circle around an open fire pit to discuss important subjects of state. It is an open area that is easily defended from attack, so one faction cannot use the hill as a trap, so to speak. It is akin to your historic tent on the battlefield, used to discuss terms of surrender. This has been our way for millions of years. I see. Aurelia knows we are coming, but I still don't know why exactly. I looked to Jack, who nodded and remained silent. You will have answers shortly, Andy Human. Remain patient, said Isaac. Well, I know the end of a conversation when I hear it. I'll just have to wait a little longer. What made me nervous was Jack saying the Kensians were leaving Earth because of something coming. Whatever that means, it can't be good for humanity. Because these Kensians were huge, tough, and highly advanced. If something was scaring them away from this place, it must be awful. And that means I am not going to like it one bitty bit. Damn you, Jack. I suddenly felt my stomach drop. I looked out the window and saw the vehicle descending at nearly a vertical drop. We were still on the highway, which, at this point, felt more like a crazy roller coaster than an actual road. I had no idea what our speed was, but it was fast, judging from the rate the ground was coming up at us. The vehicle leveled out at ground level and sped off in a direction of civilization. I could see what I would loosely describe as city buildings and habitations. There were spires and oddly shaped towers reaching high up towards the heavens. They dwarfed other buildings, which were as oddly shaped as the high-rises. Color gleamed in the reddish light, blues, silvers, blacks, reds. Bright colors were everywhere in this city. As we drew closer, I could see other such vehicles as ours, zipping to and from the city. Everywhere was movement and color. I could also see giant creatures milling about in fields of red grasses, too. I assumed they were Kensian examples of herd animals. The highway split into a fork, and Isaac directed us to the left. We were on a ground level now and moving fast. Everything was a blur as we passed. Eventually I could see a large compound rise out of the ground as we crested a small hill. It was beautiful. How can I describe this place? One building dominated all others in this compound, which I could only assume was Aurelia's palace. It was oval-shaped and lay long ways along the ground. The exterior was shimmering in silver and blues, and was featureless from what I could see. No windows, no doors, etc. Just a long, silver egg-shaped building. In front of this building was a huge pool filled with red water. It stretched nearly as long as the egg building, and was surrounded by all sorts of trees, shrubs, and other flora. This place was staggering in its beauty, and insane in its alienness. It was so completely different than anything humanity could build. I was in awe. There was no security wall here, but there was security. huge Kensians dressed in obvious combat armor and carrying heavy weapons directed us away from the main palace toward a lone hill in the distance. Isaac drove the vehicle up to the base of the hill and stopped. The doors opened and we got out. I took a moment and sniffed the air. It was different than what I was used to. It reminded me of being on a farm. The scent of grass, peat, and dirt was strong, but there were other subtleties I couldn't recognize. Richard and Harry directed us toward a well-worn path in the grass leading up the hill. Jack and I followed.
"Jack, what the fuck is going on, dude?" I whispered harshly.
"What do you mean, bro?"
"What do I mean? Dude, what did the Chewbacca's tell you while I was fixing the puffin? Who is coming, and why are the Kensians leaving Earth?"
"All that? I don't know much, dude. Only that Harry let it slip that they were on a mission to get to another world for something important. The Chewbaccas were on the way to that planet when the puffin broke down and landed in our forest."
Jack smiled.
"Pretty lucky for us, eh?"
"Lucky? Dude, look around you. This is terrible. Big-ass furry aliens living here for God knows how long. And now they're leaving because something bad is coming. I'd hardly call that lucky, bro."
"I knew you'd say that. Just relax and see what this queen chick has to say, all right?"
We walked for a few minutes more, then Jack whispered,
"And how can you say that this is terrible, dude? We're on another adventure. Aren't you excited?"
"Fuck no, dude. I'm everything but excited. I'm exhausted, hungry, and I want to go home." "No. We still have finals, for crying out loud."
"Dude, you worry too much. Listen up and have some fun for once. You're too uptight, bro. Your ass could squeeze a lump of charcoal into a diamond. Seriously, you need to relax."
"I'll fucking relax when I get home, Jack. I never wanted to be a part of this in the first place."
Yeah, you always want to go home when something exciting happens. You are the most boring person I've ever met, dude."
"Well, thank you for saying that, Jack. It means a lot," I said in all seriousness. "Still, what the hell are you getting us into this time?"
"I don't know, dude, but I can't wait to find out. There are spaceships here. Yes!"
Jack was like a kid on Christmas Eve. He was nearly vibrating with excitement. Me, not so much. "It can't be good. I got a feeling this is going to be bad, Jack. Real bad, like biting into a rotten banana kind of bad. You know, it's all black and mushy and tastes kinda garlicky and salty at the same time. That kind of bad."
"Me too, brah. Me too. Let's just listen to this Aurelia chick and see what she has to say. Regardless, this place is badass."
"I know," I sighed. "It's totally badass. I just know someone is going to try shooting me before this is all over. Just you watch."
"Probably. At least they're not going to try and cut you in half this time. And these Chewbaccas look a whole lot better than those demons, you know? I wonder how these Kensian women are in bed. I bet they're wild as hell."
Jack was smiling again. "Looking to fulfill a furry fetish, Jack?"
"Maybe. Just curious. I'd do one, though. Just to see what it's like. Who knows? It may be the best I've ever had."
I just looked at Jack with an incredulous expression on my face. Typical Jack. Always thinking with his, little Jack. He was seriously thinking about having sex with a giant alien Wookiee thing. Dude, it'll be like trying to love shaft a cat. We've never even seen a female Kensian. They could have, 8 breasts, for crying out loud.
"Oh, damn, that'll be awesome, if they did. I could motorboat those guys till I pass out."
"What about all the fur?" I asked.
"There is that. I'll just have to do my best, I guess. Hopefully she won't have any poo dingleberries hanging around down there, like lost kitties. I've seen cats with those before."
Jack looked deep in thought for a moment, then said, "Nah,
I'd have to call it off if I found any dingleberries. Alien strange aside, I draw the line at dingleberries.
So you do have standards. Huh. Never knew there was such a thing, I said as we crested the hill.
Of course, dude, Jack said, looking shocked. Give me some credit. Oh, I think we're here.
Indeed we were. The top of the hill was levelled flat, and with quite a large surface area. Dead smack in the middle was a large stone fire pit, just as Isaac had said. It was filled 8 feet high with wood, in a teepee-shaped cone. It was unlit. Some distance out from the fire pit was a circle of wooden benches. They were rough-hewn, with no back supports, and looked to be very old yet sturdy. There were a number of Kensian security guards already here. They motioned for us to come into the circle and take seats. We did as ordered. Jack and I sat on one bench, while Richard and Harry to the bench next to us. Despite the roughness of the wood, the tops were smooth, worn down by many a furry bottom.
So, Richard, asked Jack, what now? We wait on Mum.
Richard didn't even look at Jack. He was obviously still pissed at the treatment his junk had received from Jack. At least he didn't seem to need the ice bag anymore. I'd say that was a plus.
Oh, I'm scared, Richard, cried Harry. Last time I was here, Mum had me shaved and burned all me fur in the pit. Bloody awful it was. I was cold, Richard. Amazing how cold the world is without fur, Richard. And the smell was terrible too. Richard? Are you listening to me, Richard? Blink if you can hear me.
Richard was silent with his eyes tightly closed and his ears pressed firmly back onto his skull. His lips were slightly raised down the length of his muzzle, which showed the very tips of his pointy teeth. I could barely hear him growling deep within his chest.
Richard, are you in trouble? Asked Harry. You don't look well. Have you been eating? Do you have to go potty?
No response from Richard.
Richard, do you hear me? Richard, did you hear me?
Yelled Harry, mere inches from Richard's folded ears.
Shut up, Harry!
Bellowed Richard.
I'll have no more of your blithering here, you stupid git. Understand? Just shut your mouth and sit quietly.
Richard didn't move. He didn't even open his eyes. A few moments of very awkward silence fell upon the hill then.
Richard,
Harry spoke softly in a small voice.
You didn't have to yell, you know. That was rude.
Harry looked over to Jack and I.
I was only looking out for him, I was. No need to be rude to a bloke. Be good to others and good things will come to you. That's what I say, good things. I like good things. Good things make me feel...
Suddenly Richard, without saying a word, stuck his left arm straight out across Harry's chest and then stopped. Harry looked down at Richard's arm, just inches from his chest, and said,
Oi, what's this then? Why's your arm out, Richard? You see something? I don't see anything.
Right then, Richard savagely used his arm to shove Harry off the back of the bench. Harry yelped and fell backwards with a grassy thump, his pant legs sticking straight up into the air, and his feet moving this way and that.
Oi, Richard, what'd you do that for? I was only trying to help, you know. That was uncalled for, Richard. Now I'm stuck. Help me, Richard. I'm stuck and I can't move. Now see what you did. I'm stuck, Richard. I'm stuck. Help! Help!
Richard simply pushed Harry's legs off of the bench. Harry rolled around on the ground for a minute, then stood up. He was unsteady on his feet, and his fur was covered in dried grass. He tried to brush the grass off, but ended up knotting the fur worse. He looked like a furry scarecrow with no pants on.
Oi, that was very rude of you, Richard. See if I check up on you again.
And with that, Harry sat down heavily on the bench and crossed his arms. The brothers were silent for a while. I felt a warm breeze rustle through the dry grass. The smell of it was familiar yet different. I could see flying animals in the sky not too far from the hill. Their squawking was diminished with distance, but easily identifiable. They didn't have feathers, rather their wings were brown and leathery like a cave bat's here on Earth. They were also much larger than any bird I've ever seen. I sincerely hoped they wouldn't get any closer. We all sat in silence for a few minutes. I noticed how red the sky was. Their sun was identifiably different than ours. It appeared larger in the sky, nearly twice as big as our sun. It wasn't as bright either. So, that's what a red dwarf looks like up close, I thought to myself. Neat. It radiated a lot of heat, though. Cassia was obviously closer to their star than Earth was to its star. It also gave off a bleak light compared to the white light of our sun. Shadows were deeper here, even when the red sun was high up in the sky. It didn't cast off the shadows like on Earth. I noticed distances were shorter here. I didn't know if it was because of the effect of the Kensian red sun, or because we were in a vast, hollowed-out hole in the ground, filled with holographic wonders. Either way, it was completely alien. As the red sun began to lower in the sky, the moons became more visible. I couldn't tell how big they actually were because I had no idea of their distance from us. But they were obviously far different than our moon. For example, the largest moon was dull and brown, with smears of black and yellow across its surface. It was quickly racing across the sky, in the opposite direction of the other two moons. I suppose that meant it was smaller. The second moon was similar to the first, but with more red flowing across the surface, probably because of the sun's light spilling across it. The third moon was astoundingly different. It was a bright blue with light blue and white clouds. This one had an atmosphere. More than likely it was poisonous, like ammonia or something. I vaguely remember reading about what makes planets appear a certain color. Depends on its chemical makeup. Blue didn't always mean water. Neptune is blue, but terribly toxic. I suspected the same to be true with this moon. Whatever the case, the moon was beautiful, and it gleamed in the sky like a brilliant electric blue pearl. I began to scan the horizon for other oddities, when I started to hear a drumming in the distance. As one, all of the Kensian security guards stiffly stood rock straight, and quickly took up positions next to and behind us. The drumming was slow but rhythmic. I tried to stand to see what it was, but a guard put a hand on my shoulder and growled. He pushed me back down onto the bench, and kept his hand on my shoulder. Jack saw this and started to stand up as well. I looked at him as if to say, "It's all right, dude." And he relaxed. A guard was behind him too. I began to get nervous. I hoped Aurelia was coming, and the drumming was from her approach. After a few minutes of waiting, the drumming became louder and louder. Jack and I looked at each other. I had worry stitched across my face, while Jack looked blank for a moment, then smiled. "Dude, don't you ever get worried?" I thought to myself. Of course not. This was Jack, after all, the man who could not fail. The man with the forever fatally optimistic outlook on everything. And the bastard was always right. We saw several glowing points of light crest on the top of the hill. The light was blush white, and was difficult to directly look into. They were moving slowly but gained higher altitude as they approached the hill. Suddenly, an entourage of Kensians broached the hilltop. The first to come into view were obviously more security guards, but others came in from behind with non-military-looking garb. Most wore long robes of various muted colors and patterns. But one stood out. She was a female, the first either of us had seen. She was slightly smaller than the males, but with a thinner, more lithe frame. Her facial features were feminine. Her main color was of a light tan, with white fur stretching from her muzzle down her chin and below her collar. She was wearing a long, full-length dress of blue and green. The colors constantly faded into other colors like a slow neon sign. It was as if the fabric itself was some sort of display screen, but flexible and wearable. The last thing I noticed was a very thin ring of what looked to me as gold surrounding her forehead. A black dot sparkled at the center of the ring, just above her eyes. The guard spread out in a circle around the foot of the hill and faced outward, which I assume was to overlook the hill against any intrusion. The rest of the party stayed a respectable distance from the female. The glowing spheres moved all around, above us. Cameras, perhaps? Maybe. I honestly had no idea what they were or what they represented. No one paid any attention at all, however. Just then, Jack leaned over to me and whispered,
"Dude, I'd totally do her."